New York never really sleeps, but sometimes it forgets how to dream. At 2 in the morning, the streets of the Lower East Side glimmered with rain-slick neon. A lone saxophone cried somewhere near Delancey Street, the sound bending and breaking through the hiss of tires and the buzz of streetlights. Eli Turner sat on a cracked stool outside the subway station, guitar on his lap, case open for coins. His fingers were red from the cold, but he kept playing, half for money, half for mercy. He'd come to New York chasing music, chasing meaning, and wound up chasing rent. People passed like ghosts. No one listened, not really, until one woman stopped. She had a camera slung around her neck and eyes that didn't belong in this city. They were too soft, too curious. Clara Hayes, 27, freelance photojournalist, had just returned from covering protests in Ferguson and wildfires in California. She'd seen too much of the world's pain, and yet here she was stopping for a song. "Do you always play this late?" she asked, tilting her head. "Only when I forget what sleep feels like," Eli said, a tired smile tugging at his mouth. She dropped a $5 bill into his case, then hesitated. "Mind if I take your picture?" He looked up. "Why?" "Because you look like a story." "Maybe I'm a tragedy," he said. "Even tragedies deserve good lighting," she replied. The shutter clicked, freezing him in a moment he didn't know would change everything. The next evening, Clara emailed him the photo. The subject line simply read, "You should see what I saw." In the picture, the rain made halos around the street lights, and Eli's eyes looked like he was praying to something he no longer believed in. He replied, "If you ever need background music for your next story, I'm cheaper than Spotify." She laughed when she read it, out loud, alone in her apartment filled with half-packed boxes and old film rolls. That single exchange turned into another, then another. Within a week, they were texting like old friends. Within a month, they were sharing silence comfortably over late-night ramen. Clara lived in a small walk-up in Brooklyn with a cat named Miles, after Miles Davis, and walls covered in photos of strangers. Eli lived in a basement apartment in Harlem that smelled perpetually of damp strings and ambition. He played at cafes, open mics, and sometimes weddings where no one noticed the music unless it stopped. He'd once had a record deal offer, until his younger brother Noah crashed Eli's car the day before the audition. Noah walked away with a broken wrist. Eli walked away with a limp in his heart that music couldn't fix. Since then, he'd carried guilt the way others carried Lucky Charms. Clara, meanwhile, was haunted by her own ghosts, the wildfire she'd photographed that took her mentor's life. She hadn't been back to California since. Their first real date wasn't supposed to be one. They met for coffee at a tiny place in Greenwich Village called the Roast of Eden. The owner, an old jazz drummer named Leon, played vinyl records that crackled like warm fire. Clara ordered black coffee. Eli predictably forgot his wallet. She smirked. "Good thing I'm buying. Consider it payment for emotional labor after reading your sad boy lyrics on Instagram." He pretended to pout. Their poetic expressions of inner turmoil. Their captions about spilled beer and heartbreak. They both laughed, the easy kind, the kind that makes people nearby glance over and smile without knowing why. Weeks turned into months, and their lives intertwined like melody and harmony. Clara photographed Eli's gigs, capturing him mid-song, sweat on his brow, eyes closed. He started writing music that sounded like her, wild, honest, bright. They talked about everything, art, loss, whether love was an act of bravery or delusion. Clara said it was both. Eli said, "Then maybe we're both doomed and lucky." She kissed him for the first time outside that same cafe, under a streetlight that flickered like an old film reel. It wasn't cinematic, it was messy and real, the kind of kiss that feels like home and goodbye all at once. By spring, Eli had a shot at a breakthrough, a charity concert for musicians affected by hospital debt. The organizer wanted him to headline. He told Clara, "If this works out, maybe I can finally pay rent and eat." She teased, "Or you'll spend it all on guitar strings and metaphors." "Metaphors last longer," he said. She rolled her eyes but hugged him tighter. For the first time in years, hope didn't feel like a stranger. But fate doesn't take appointments. 2 nights before the concert, Clara was on her way to meet Eli after a photo assignment when her taxi skidded on the wet Queensboro Bridge. The collision wasn't fatal, but it was close. When Eli reached the hospital, breathless and shaking, doctors said she'd live, but her camera had taken the worst of the damage. It shattered into pieces against her chest, leaving glass fragments near her heart. Surgery was risky. She woke to Eli's hand in hers. "I'm okay," she whispered. "Don't you dare die before my big gig," he joked, voice cracking. She smiled weakly. "You'll need new material if I do." He laughed, but it came out as a sob. That night, Eli sat alone in the hospital chapel. He'd stopped praying years ago, but he found himself whispering bargains to the ceiling anyway. If you let her live, I'll give it all up. The concert, the music, everything. Just let her live? Outside, the city hummed on, oblivious taxis, sirens, laughter, all of it beating against the windows like rain. Hospitals have a strange kind of silence. It's not peace, it's waiting. Machines hum softly, footsteps echo down endless white corridors, and hope becomes something fragile you hold between your fingers, afraid to break it. Clara woke to the sound of Eli humming. He sat beside her bed, head bent over his guitar playing quietly, the same melody he'd played the night they met. His fingers trembled, but he kept going, eyes closed, as if the music itself could keep her heart beating. "You're off key," she whispered. Eli looked up, startled. Then relief flooded his face. "You scared me, you know that?" "Wouldn't be the first time," she murmured, smiling faintly. He set the guitar aside and took her hand carefully, tracing the ivy line like it was sacred. "You shouldn't joke." "You?" His voice caught. "You almost didn't make it." "I'm tougher than I look." "Yeah?" he said softly. "You always were." The doctors said the surgery had gone well, but they'd left a fragment of glass near her heart. It was too risky to remove, and she'd need months to recover. The camera, her constant companion, had shattered completely. When she was strong enough to walk again, she asked Eli, "Do you think you can fix something that's broken beyond repair?" He hesitated. "Depends what it is." "My courage," she said, smiling sadly. He leaned closer. "Then yeah, I'll find a way." Eli cancelled his performance at the charity concert. The organizer was furious. His friends called him crazy, but Eli didn't care. He spent his nights at the hospital, reading to Clara, writing songs she'd never hear on stage. She tried to convince him to go back to music. "Eli, you can't give this up for me." "I didn't," he said. "I gave it up to you." "What does that even mean?" "It means I made a promise," he whispered. "And some promises matter more than dreams." Clara didn't know what he meant until months later. She was recovering at home, learning how to breathe without pain, how to walk without fear. Eli found part-time work at a music shop and took gigs only when she insisted. They'd sit on the roof of her apartment on warm summer nights, watching the skyline shimmer. Sometimes, when the city lights flickered against the clouds, she'd say, "It feels like the world is trying to remember us." Eli would smile and say, "It already does." But something in his eyes was changing. A quiet exhaustion, a distant ache he never explained. One night as the September wind turned cold, she found him sitting by the window, staring at his guitar. The strings were silent. The case was closed. "You haven't played in weeks," she said softly. He didn't answer. "Eli?" He turned to her slowly. "Clara, what if we're not meant to last forever?" She froze. "Why would you say that?" "Because maybe some loves aren't built for forever. Maybe they're built to save us for a little while." She shook her head. "Don't talk like that." He smiled faintly, eyes wet. "Then tell me to stay." "I'm not going to beg you to love me." "I already do," he whispered. "That's the problem." A few days later, Clara received a message, an email from an unknown sender. It contained a photo, Eli on stage, under blinding lights playing a new song. The caption read, "For the girl who taught me what silence means." Confused, she tried to call him but he didn't pick up. Then came another email, this time from the hospital. Eli had collapsed during rehearsal. Internal bleeding, they said. He hadn't told anyone he'd been sick for months, a rare blood disorder that worsened with stress. He'd kept it hidden from her, afraid she'd stop healing for his sake. When she reached the hospital, they wouldn't let her in right away. She stood in the hallway, trembling, her camera strap clutched in her hand, though she had no camera anymore. Finally, a nurse led her to his room. He looked impossibly pale, but he smiled when he saw her. "Hey," he said, voice barely a whisper. "Guess you win." "Win what?" she managed to ask. "You lived," he said. "That's all I wanted." Tears streamed down her cheeks. "Don't you dare talk like this. You're going to be fine. Promise me something," he said, ignoring her. "Promise you'll take pictures again." "I can't. Not without you." "You have to. Otherwise, what was all this for?" She shook her head, sobbing. "Why didn't you tell me you were sick?" "Because I didn't want to be another weight around your heart," he said. "You already carried too much." The monitors beeped softly, slow, steady, fragile. Clara held his hand, pressing it to her chest. "You can't leave me," she whispered. "You said you wouldn't." He smiled faintly. "I said I'd love you. That doesn't end here. Eli. Clara, look at me. His voice trembled. If I don't make it, don't waste your life writing about what you lost. Write about what you had. 'Kay? She nodded through her tears. Okay. I love you, he said, the words escaping like breath. Always will. Then the monitors flattened into a single line of sound. For a long time she sat there in the dark, holding his hand long after it had gone cold. Outside, the city lights shimmered on the wet pavement, like the night they first met, when rain had turned strangers into something infinite. The next morning, Clara picked up Eli's guitar from the corner of the room. Inside the case, she found an envelope with her name written in his handwriting. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a note and a small USB drive. The note read, "Clara, these are all the songs I wrote for you. If love is what we leave behind, then maybe music is the proof it ever existed. Play them when you're ready, not to remember me, but to remember yourself. E." For weeks, she couldn't listen. But one night when the ache became unbearable, she plugged the drive into her laptop. The first song was called "The Lights We Leave Behind." It began with soft guitar and the whisper of his voice. "If I'm the echo, you're the sound. If I'm the lost, you're what I found. So when the night forgets my name, light your sky and love the same." Clara wept until dawn. Then she opened her eyes, picked up her old camera, repaired with tape and willpower, and took a photo of the sunrise. For the first time since losing him, the light grief doesn't end. It just changes shape. For weeks after Eli's funeral, Clara moved through life like someone underwater. Everything sounded distant, footsteps, laughter, her own heartbeat. Even the city seemed quieter, as if New York itself were holding its breath in sympathy. His guitar sat in her apartment corner untouched. His clothes still hung in her closet. The smell of hemp pine soap and coffee lingered in the sheets like a ghost refusing to leave. People told her to stay strong. They said, he'd want you to move on. But no one explained how. One grey morning, she found herself at the Roast of Eden, the cafe where it had all started. Leon, the old jazz drummer who owned the place, looked up as she walked in. His eyes softened when he saw her. "Haven't seen you in a while," he said quietly. "Yeah," she replied. "Been away." He nodded toward the stage. "You know, he played here the night before She nodded. "I know. He told me once," Leon continued, "that love's like music. You don't stop playing just because the song ends." Clara's throat tightened. "I don't think I remember how." "Then start with a hum," he said gently. "Sometimes that's enough." That night, Clara opened the USB drive again. She listened to Eli's voice fill the apartment song after song, pieces of him she hadn't known existed. Each melody carried a fragment of their story. The first song, Rainlight, was about the night they met. Promise in the quiet, about the hospital. Home in the sound, about the way her laughter made him forget pain. But the final song was different. It was unfinished, just a guitar loop and a single line. "If you ever find the light again, take it further than I could." Something inside her shifted. She packed her camera, her laptop, and Eli's old notebook, and boarded a train headed west. No plan, no destination, just movement. He'd once told her that stillness kills the soul faster than failure. So she moved. She took photos of strangers. A mother and child feeding pigeons in Chicago. A homeless veteran smiling at a stray dog in Denver. A teenage couple dancing in a gas station parking lot somewhere in Kansas. Everywhere she went, she looked for pieces of Eli, not his face, but his presence, his warmth. And somehow, every photo felt like he'd guided her hand. By the time she reached Los Angeles, her camera was full and her heart was raw. She rented a small studio apartment near the beach, the kind of place that smelled of salt and old dreams. There, she began piecing together a photo series she called The Light We Leave. Each photo had a small quote beneath it, all lines from Eli's songs. Her favorite one, "Love isn't what we keep, it's what we give away." Months passed. The series caught attention online. An art magazine called it a haunting portrayal of loss and renewal. Soon, a gallery in New York reached out asking to exhibit her work. At first, Clara hesitated. Going back to New York felt like reopening an old wound. But Eli's note echoed in her mind, "Play them when you're ready." And maybe she finally was. The exhibition opened in early spring. The gallery walls were lined with her photos, faces, cities, moments that whispered both sorrow and hope. At the center stood a single spotlight, shining on an empty guitar case. Inside, a small plaque read, "Eli Turner, 1993 to 2024. Some people live through their music. He lived for it. People wandered through, some crying, some smiling. Strangers left notes at the display, letters about the ones they'd lost, about love that ended but never really did. Clara stood quietly in a corner, watching, feeling something she hadn't felt in months: peace. Later that night, when the crowd had gone, she stayed behind. The lights dimmed, the echoes faded, and she stood before the guitar case one last time. "I did it, Eli," she whispered. "You said love doesn't end here, and I think I finally understand." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small flash drive, the unfinished song, the one with only a single line. She placed it gently in the case beside his nameplate. "Now it's complete," she said softly. The next morning, she returned to the rooftop of her old Brooklyn apartment, the same one where they used to watch the city lights. The sunrise painted the sky gold. She lifted her camera and took a photo. Then, almost without thinking, she began to hum, softly at first, then louder, until the hum became the melody of Eli's final song. "If you ever find the light again, take it further than I could." Her voice cracked on the last note, but it didn't matter. The wind carried the rest. Weeks later, a letter arrived at her new address. No sender name, no return address, just a small envelope with her name typed neatly on it. Inside was a photo. It was one she didn't take Eli on stage mid-performance, a beam of light cutting across his face like a halo. On the back, written in Leon's handwriting, were 5 words: "He'd be proud of you." Clara pressed the photo to her heart and smiled through her tears. Years passed. Her work became known across the country: exhibitions, interviews, a book titled "The Lights We Leave Behind." But no matter where she went, she carried him with her, in her art, in her music, in the quiet moments between breaths. Sometimes when she photographed the sunset, she swore she could hear his guitar faint, like a memory that refuses to fade. One evening, as she watched the waves crash against the California shore, she whispered into the wind, "Eli, I kept a promise." The sea didn't answer, but a single gull flew past, dipping low into the golden light before disappearing into the horizon. And for the first time, Clara didn't feel alone. 10 years later, the city felt smaller, or maybe Clara had just grown bigger than its shadows. She was 37 now. Her hair was shorter, her smile quieter. The world knew her name, Clara Hayes, award-winning photojournalist, author, and visual poet. But whenever people asked her where her journey began, she always said the same thing: "On a rainy street in New York, when a stranger played a song that saved my life." It was autumn again, the kind of soft, golden autumn Eli had loved. Clara had returned to New York for a retrospective of her life's work. The gallery had invited her to give a closing speech a decade after her first exhibition. When she stepped inside, she felt a familiar ache. The walls were lined with photos she'd taken all over the world, but at the center, just as before, stood Eli's guitar case under a single light. Same plaque, same quiet reverence. Only this time, something new lay inside. A small brown envelope. Unmarked. She frowned. The curator hadn't mentioned anything about new materials being added. Carefully, she picked it up and opened it. Inside was a CD, old-fashioned, almost obsolete now, with the last song written in Eli's handwriting. Her breath caught. Back at her hotel, she dusted off an old portable CD player she carried out of habit, a relic from another life. She placed the disc inside, pressed play, and waited. The static faded. Then came a familiar voice, his voice, but softer, weaker, like it had been recorded in secret. "Hey Clara, if you're hearing this, then I guess I didn't get to say goodbye properly." Her heart clenched. "I recorded this the night before the concert, before I knew how bad things were. I didn't want to scare you or make you worry. But there's something I couldn't leave unsaid." He paused. The sound of him breathing, alive, human, filled the quiet. "You once told me photography was how you remembered the world. Music was how I tried to understand it. And somehow, we found each other in between. If I don't make it, don't waste time chasing the ghost of what we were. Promise me you'll love again, not because I'm gone, but because you're still here. You deserve that. You always did." Clara pressed her hand to her mouth, shaking. "And maybe one day, when the city feels kind again, you'll find someone sitting in the same spot I was, playing the same chords, chasing the same foolish dream. Smile at him, Clara. Give him the $5. Tell him every tragedy deserves good lighting." He laughed softly, the same laugh that used to make her forget everything wrong with the world. "You were my light. And lights don't die. They just find new skies to shine in." The recording ended with the faint strum of a guitar. Then silence. She didn't move for a long time. The city outside her window glowed, thousands of tiny suns flickering across glass and rain. For a moment, she could almost believe he was there, somewhere between the lights and the music. When she finally stood, she whispered, "You always did get the last word." The next day, she returned to the Roast of Eden. The cafe hadn't changed much, same scuffed floors, same smell of espresso and vinyl. Leon was gone now, his daughter Maya ran the place. When she saw Clara, her eyes widened. "You're the Clara Hayes, right? My dad used to talk about you and some guy with a guitar." "Eli," Clara said softly. Maya nodded. "Yeah," said, "you two were like a song that never really ended." Clara smiled faintly. Maybe he was right? That evening, as the cafe crowd thinned, Maya asked if she wanted to play something. Clara hesitated. She wasn't a musician, not like Eli, but she took the guitar anyway. Her fingers trembled as she strummed a few chords, the way he used to teach her. Then she began to sing, quietly, the words of his unfinished song, the one he'd left for her. "If you ever find the light again, take it further than I could." The room went silent. Even the espresso machine seemed to stop. When she finished, Maya whispered, "That was beautiful." Clara smiled through tears. It was his. A young man sitting near the counter stood and approached her. He was maybe 22, with the guitar slung over his shoulder, the kind of hungry, hopeful look Eli used to have. "That song," he said softly. "What's it called?" She looked at him, really looked, and for a moment her heart stopped. Not because he looked like Eli, but because he carried that same light in his eyes. "It's called The Lights We Leave Behind," she said. "It's about love and letting go." He nodded, almost reverently. "Would you mind if I learned it?" Clara hesitated, then smiled. It was meant to be shared. Weeks later, she saw a video online. A young musician playing The Lights We Leave Behind at a small park in Brooklyn. The caption read, "A song by a man I never knew, taught to me by a woman who loved him." The comment section was full of strangers sharing their own stories of loss and hope. And just like that, Eli's voice, his music, his love, lived again. Years passed quietly. Clara's work continued, exhibitions, mentoring young photographers, traveling less but feeling more. And every autumn, she returned to New York, always stopping by the same corner near Delancey Street. She'd leave a single white rose and a folded note that said, "Still playing, still remembering." On her 45th birthday, Clara stood on the roof of her California home, camera in hand. The sky burned orange and pink. For a moment she thought of all the years, all the photographs, all the songs, and realized Eli had kept his promise too. Because love, she understood now, was never about permanence. It was about presence, about showing up, once, deeply, completely, and leaving something beautiful behind. That night, she sat by the window, watching the stars. The world outside was quiet, but in her heart, a familiar voice whispered, like wind through strings, "If I'm the echo, you're the sound." She smiled. "And if you're the light," she whispered back, "I'll keep shining." Epilogue. A decade later, at a small exhibit in Brooklyn titled Echoes of Light, a young artist displayed two objects side by side, a weathered guitar pick and a broken camera lens. The label read, "Artifacts from a love story that outlived its ending." Below it, a quote from Clara Hayes' final interview. "Love doesn't die. It changes form, from touch to song to light. And if we're lucky, we get to carry that light forward for someone else." And somewhere in New York, under the flicker of a streetlight, a musician played an old melody, the same one Eli once played long ago on a rainy night when love began. A woman stopped, dropped a $5 bill into his case and smiled. "Do you always play this late?" she asked. He grinned. "Only when I forget what sleep feels like." And the city once again remembered how to dream. The end. The Lights We Leave Behind, a story of love, loss, and the kind of light that never goes out.